Now I would like to welcome to the stage the Honorable Robert A. Katzman, Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. He was appointed to the Court of Appeals in 1999 and became Chief Judge in 2013. At the time of his appointment to the court, he was the Walsh Professor of Government, Professor of Law, and Professor of Public Policy at Georgetown University. He also served as a Fellow of the Governmental Studies Program of the Brookings Institution and as President of the Governance Institute. Judge Katzman received an honorary degree from New York Law School in 2016, and he has been a wonderful partner and friend to the law school in so many ways. Welcome, Judge Katzman.
Dean Crowell, Chairman Abbey, it is a privilege to offer a brief introduction of Justice Stephen Breyer. Apart from my own admiration for Justice Breyer and the inspiration he has given me, being here at this ceremony is especially meaningful for me because my twin brother Gary, a judge on the United States Court of International Trade, was Justice Breyer's first law clerk as a judge on the First Circuit. And the Justice's mentorship over the years has meant so much to Gary and to all of our family. Justice Breyer's private virtues are the equal of his public virtues, about which I will speak in a moment. He is a devoted husband, father, grandfather, and friend. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. With us today is Reverend Chloe Breyer, who is the executive director of the Interfaith Center, and whose work to promote understanding, tolerance, to serve the vulnerable is needed now more than ever. Now today, in honoring Justice Breyer, we celebrate a man who is the antidote, the very antidote to the gloomy skepticism that surrounds our national institutions. Survey after survey shows that the public's trust in our governmental institutions, the presidency, the Congress, and even the courts is at the lowest level ever. Justice Breyer, by his life, by his example, shows that there is much that we can do to keep our institutions strong. Throughout his career, he's been dedicated to the conviction that our institutions, with proper consideration, attentive care, and occasional correction, can work for the people, consistent with the framers' constitutional design. He's been vitally concerned with the basic questions. How do our institutions actually work? How can they be made to work better? And in approaching these questions, he is very consciously, I think, a problem solver who has equipped himself to tackle those concerns through a career that has mixed the intellectual life of the academy with a real world of governing in all three branches of government, as a special assistant to the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, an assistant special prosecutor, as a consultant to and chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as a commissioner on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and of course, as a judge. His life in academia as a leading scholar of administrative law, antitrust and regulation, and in government gives him a credibility in both worlds. When he speaks, for example, to congressional staff, he establishes an immediate connection with his audience because of their shared experiences. For Justice Breyer, government exists to address very human problems, and throughout his career, he has never lost sight of those human concerns as he examines government's role. Law is not just about doctrine and abstract concepts. Law is a human institution serving basic societal needs. As he put it, law must work for people. His opinions evidence his problem-solving bent. In his writing, he is very much aware of not only how the disposition might affect the litigants at hand, but also the broader society. Opinions have consequences, and Justice Breyer, mindful of those effects, suggests that a court must exercise due care and caution in adjudicating disputes. And from his opinions, we learn about his conception of the judge's role in a democratic society, the application of active liberty, about the need for a degree of judicial modesty about the judiciary's relationship to the elected branches. A hallmark of a Breyer opinion is that it can be understood by the interested citizen, its persuasive prose shorn of footnotes. There is a civility of tone, a sense of recognition that all of us who are judges are trying the best we can to render the result the law requires. Justice Breyer has a basic faith in the citizenry, and he well appreciates that the maintenance of a vital, independent judiciary depends upon the support of the people. His book, Active Liberty, for instance, speaks to all citizens, not just lawyers. He reaches out to diverse groups, even to school children, reading to school children. As he wrote in Active Liberty, and I quote, "Judges can explain in terms the public can understand just what the Constitution is about. We judges cannot insist that Americans participate in government, but we can make clear that our Constitution depends upon it. Their participation is necessary." As he also said, and I quote, "How can our work better reflect several basic tenets of public modern life? First, the fact that in our democracy, power flows from the people. Second, the need to resist the technical atomizing forces that divide us and to encourage those forces that unify and bring us together as a community. And third, the effort to prevent our government from being perceived as a hostile, alien entity, but rather to emphasize through participation that it can and should amount to no more than our nation's individual citizens themselves, each showing a civic face as each acts in his or her own public capacity. There is no justice, no judge who better epitomizes the judge as citizen of the world than Justice Breyer, who encourages us to learn from other societies so that ours can be a more just society. The esteem with which he is held throughout the world is legion. In France, for instance, he is one of only a handful of individuals with foreign citizenship who is a member of the prestigious Académie des Sciences Morales et Politiques. For the book, Judges in Contemporary Democracy, an International Conversation, he translated the French portions into English. And in his latest and much heralded book, The Court and the World, a tour de force, he argues for increased awareness by our courts of the legal system of other countries, not as a luxury, but as a necessity in this global, interdependent world. At a time of separateness, as Robert Putnam put it, of bowling alone, Justice Breyer articulates his vision of life, of a flow between citizens and the branches of government, and encourages a vision of an informed and dynamic community that unites us. So you can see why I say to you, in these times, we have in Justice Breyer someone whose example inspires us to do better and to do more, who points the way to a future where our constitutional system will remain strong, where the rule of law, with your assistance, will help preserve our basic liberties. It is an honor to introduce to you now Justice Stephen Breyer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. That was a wonderful introduction. And thank you, Dean. And thank you, Arthur and boards of trustees. Thank you for the degree. You know, we're going to share this degree. That's pretty good. And I didn't even have to take any exams. Do you realize? Absolutely fabulous. Very nice. And thank you for that ceremony, too. The student speakers were great. They were all great. And I sat here listening and realizing a lot of you have had to overcome some pretty big obstacles to get where you are today. Good. Well done. Now, I'm not going to congratulate you yet. Why? Because I want first to congratulate maybe your parents, maybe a spouse, a loved person, a friend who got you here. Because they gave, yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. They gave you a lot. Emotional support, time, the occasional check, we hope, but there we are. And don't forget your grandparents. Yeah, you know why? There's a special reason. I want to tell you the special reason. Your grandparents are the only human beings on this earth who know that every single thing you've done is perfect. So, of course, the first thing at a graduation speech is to congratulate the graduates, which I've just done, and I do. Now, the next thing is a little advice. Now, Siri, I mean, they made me very nervous talking about Siri. I have to get my grandchildren here so we could work that. But the best advice, actually, that I got, I think, when I was about your age, serious advice, was from Bayless Manning, who was a dean, a law school dean. I was just about the age of many of you. Yeah, you know, that's how I was feeling. And he said, calm down. I mean, some of you will have jobs clerking. They only last for a year, I hate to tell you, sometimes 2 years. And there's a terrible system to get clerking, which is really confusing. And there's some judges like him who are trying to straighten it out. And I'm all for that straightening it out, 100%. I'm not even going to take people, if I possibly can avoid it, who don't go through this straightened out system. But that's just a few of you. And it ends. And others of you, I hope, have jobs, and some of you don't. Okay. You know what he told me? He said this, and it's so true when you think about it. You have a lot of choices to make when you're close to your age. A lot of choices, and they're important. And you know what? You're never going to know more than about 5% of what you really ought to know in order to make the best choice. And no matter what you do, maybe you can get it up to 6%, but not more than that. So he said, you know, use a little common sense. I mean, don't be a circus tightrope dancer unless, you know, you're special. But within a broad range, you choose. You choose, and then life has an odd way of wrapping itself around you. And there will be some moments that'll be terrible and sad. And unless you're very unlucky, however, there will be some moments that are wonderful. And that's what'll happen. And you can't control it. You simply choose. And his bottom line in today's jargon was, so lighten up. End of advice. Now you're going into a great profession. Why? Well, you have a good mind, but you also need a heart. You need both. Your own interests in this profession are not paramount. You have clients, no matter what you do. And it's their interests you're representing, and you're trying to make them a little bit better off, and you're trying to resolve conflicts they have, and you may be out working in social services, or you may not. But either way, you're using your head, you're using your heart. And everybody has a heart, but not everybody has a head. And remember that. So think. Now, I thought that's pretty good. And now, what do I hope for you? That's the advice. It was personal. I liked it. Made me feel better. I stopped going like that. Began to go, all right. Anyway, that was the advice. But I can't tell you what to do either. I can't tell you what to do. You can't tell another person what to do. But I can have a hope for you. In fact, I can have 2 or 3 very general hopes. And one hope I have for you is that you find someone to love and you have a happy family life. And I can hope for you, and it looks like it's going strong, I can hope for you that you'll have an interesting and satisfying is the right word, career. And you're on the right track there. And I can hope for you another thing, And that hope is whatever your career and whatever the situation is and how everything goes, you find the time to participate in public life. Now, I can't tell you you have to. I can't tell you what form it should take. I don't care if it's the library board or the parking commission, or I don't care what it is. Maybe it's going out and politically organize. It doesn't have to be. It's at least voting. It's at least talking to your friends. Now, why do I feel I can tell you something like that? The reason I can tell you, I think, is because every day I work with this document, the Constitution. It does pretty well, not perfectly, but pretty well. And I can tell you out of my own experience, well, if you choose not to do that, if you choose not to participate, this document will not work. That I think I know pretty well. Because it foresees your participation. It foresees you, when you think things are going badly, you'll go out there and talk to some people and say, let's have them go better. And you try to convince them. And you don't scream at them. You know, I like those speeches today. I was sitting there listening. And I thought, you know, I can tell myself a few things too. Because we're having a little difficult time at the court at the end of June. And we don't always agree. And I think to myself usually, and don't tell anyone I said this, but I say, why does anybody ever disagree with me who is so reasonable? I don't understand it. And yet, calm down, I sell to myself. Hey, it's a big country. There are 320 million people. There's every race, there's every religion, there's every point of view. And so every point of view, my mother used to say that. We were from San Francisco. She said, there's no view so crazy, there isn't somebody in this country who doesn't hold it. And then she said they all live in Los Angeles. But nonetheless, that was, all right. But you see, it isn't so terrible that with this generally phrased document, people on our court or other courts have different points of view. And the way around that is you try to persuade them. And sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you don't. And that's just what it is. And it's not going to help you to scream or rant or rave. Just make you worse off, not better off. So, and what is it about the document? Well, the question I get, and when I sit there, when I look out at that room, the room where Brown versus Board was decided, the room where so much of importance was decided, not all of it good either, but some of it pretty good. I think, my goodness, it is true. Every race, every religion, every possible point of view, they've decided to come here into this room. That's important. And it leads to a question. And the person who put that question best, I thought, to me, was a woman who was president of the Supreme Court of Ghana. She was the Chief Justice. And what she was trying to do was to bring a little bit more democracy and human rights through law into Ghana. And we had a conversation for an hour or so, but her main question was this: why do people do what you say? Hey, that's a question. Why do they do what you say? We're 9 judges. Why? Well, how was I going to answer that question? I couldn't answer it directly, but I could tell her a couple of stories. And they're stories I've often told because I think they're important, that you know them, that I know them, that others know them. And it's about the court, and it's about the country. First story, brief, but to the point. In the 1830s, 1840s, northern Georgia was owned by the Cherokee Indians. And unfortunately for the Cherokee Indians, they discovered gold. And the Georgians thought, why should the Indians have this gold? Why shouldn't we have it? So you know what they did? They took it. Now, the Cherokees were a pretty civilized group of people. They hired the best lawyer of the day, Willard Wirtz. He brought the case to the Supreme Court, and after a lot of monkey business going on, but he won. He won the case on the merits. Of course, he should have. If you look up the law, he's clearly right. And the reason you might know something about the case is because that is the case in respect to which President Andrew Jackson, the President of the United States, supposedly said, John Marshall, the Chief Justice, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. And he sent troops down to Georgia, but not to enforce the Supreme Court decision, rather to evict the Indians, which he did. And they marched along the Trail of Tears down to Oklahoma, where their descendants, many died on the way, where their descendants live to this day. I told her that story. But our country's had lots of ups and downs. We've had a civil war. We've had 80 years of segregation. We've had all kinds of stuff. All right? The second story has a much happier ending, but not as quickly as you might think. I can remember this. You're nowhere near old enough. All right? 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. Great day in the court. The court says, no more segregation, no more legal segregation. Equal protection of the law. And you know what happened after they decided that in 1954? In 1955, you know what happened? Yeah, you're right, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And you know what happened in 1956? Yeah, you're right again. Double nothing. In 1957, well, a judge in Little Rock said, integrate Central High School. And that was when, and I can remember it, Governor Falbus got out there in front of Central High School, and he said, you may have the judge's order, but I have the state militia, and they aren't going to walk into this school, those black children. And there was a picture went around the world of Elizabeth Eckford, you know, studying at books like this, and a girl behind her had her face contorted with rage at the thought that a black child would go into her white school. Yeah. And so what was going to happen? Well, Governor Falbus said he'd meet with President Eisenhower, which he did. And President Eisenhower had to make a decision. His wise counselor, Herbert Brownell, send troops. Governor Burns, not a big segregationist, a moderate on race governor of South Carolina, formerly a member of the Supreme Court, said, if you send troops, you better be prepared to reoccupy the entire South. You better be prepared for a second Reconstruction. No, but the wise counselor prevailed, and I can remember. Paratroopers, I think 1,000, from Fort Bragg, the 101st Airborne, got on those airplanes and they went to Little Rock, and everyone in the United States at that time knew who the 101st was. They were the airborne division that had, in Normandy, been hung up on the steeples and shot down. They were the heroes of the Battle of the Bulge. He knew what he was doing, Eisenhower. And he sent those troops in, and they took those black children by the hand, and they walked into that white school. Yeah, happy ending. Great day for America. Great day for equality. Great day for the rule of law. Ah, yes. But, eventually the troops have to leave. And read that history. When you have nothing else to do, go read it that year. It was awful. They closed the school. That's what they did. Now, they went to the Supreme Court again, and the Supreme Court said, hey, integrate the school, integrate the school, integrate the school, all 9 judges. And what Governor Falbus did? Just what I told you. He closed the school, and no one was educated. No one was educated. But it couldn't last. It couldn't last. And they put a new school board in. And that was the time of Martin Luther King, and it was the time of the Freedom Riders, and it was the time of Rosa Parks and a lot of other things. But I'll tell you something, all those other things, they weren't lawyers. But they'd been spurred on. They couldn't keep the schools closed. And eventually, the die had been cast. I once asked Vernon Jordan, who was a great civil rights leader, do you think the Supreme Court decision made a difference? He said, of course it made a difference. Of course it made a difference. But it was a kind of catalyst. It was a kind of catalyst. All right? Mm-hmm. You see what I'm trying to tell the woman from Ghana? I'm trying to tell her this. It's not just the lawyers, it's not just the judges who have to believe in a rule of law. Contrary to popular belief, there are 319 million of our 320 million Americans who are not lawyers and judges. Yeah. And they're the ones that have to follow it. So go to the villages. Go to the cities. Get those lawyers to explain to others, whether they're in the newspapers or whether they're in the villages, why it's important for them. And why? Well, I heard Senator Reid, who was the Democratic leader, say at the time of Bush versus Gore, a case that probably you know, which was 5-4, I was in the 4. All right? I heard him say the most important thing about that case is hardly ever remarked, despite the fact it was important, very important. A lot of people thought it was wrong, at least half. I say maybe a few more than half. I thought it was wrong. Yeah, the people, he said, followed it. No riots, no guns, no rocks being thrown in the streets. So I told that, just like I told you. I told that story to a group out in the West at Stanford. And I said, I know what at least 20% of you or more are thinking. You're thinking, too bad there weren't a few rocks. Too bad there weren't a few guns. Too bad there wasn't a little resistance there. And I say, before you think that, before you decide that's your answer, go turn on the television set and go see how people resolve their differences in countries that do have those riots and in countries that don't have a rule of law. Yeah, that's right. Because it means sometimes you have to accept decisions that you think are wrong, and if it's 5-4 in our court, somebody's wrong. You see? And do you accept it or not? Do you think it's important or not? It's easy to think it's important when you agree with the decision. Not quite so easy when you don't. But that's the time when the chips are down for the rule of law. Or why? So now, why is it so important? Why have I spent some time here talking to you about things mostly you've heard or know, but more time talking to her about some things she wouldn't necessarily know? Why am I stressing this? What's so important about this rule of law? Well, lots of things is the answer. Lots of things. But one thing, or maybe two, I think important is captured for my generation, not necessarily yours, but for mine absolutely, by a book written by a French writer, Albert Camus, called The Plague, and it's about a plague, the germ of the plague that enters Oran, a city in Algeria, which kills many people. It's an analogy. It's a symbol. It's really for the Nazis in France in World War II. That's what he's talking about. And at the end of the book, he says, why did I write this book? Why? He says, I wanted people to know about the struggle. I wanted them to know about doctors. Doctors are people who help others without thinking about it. They don't philosophize, they just help. But most of all, he said, because that plague germ never dies. Never. It goes into remission. It lurks. That plague germ, that evil part of every human being that's there, no matter what you do. It's there. It goes into remission. It rests in the hallways, in the file cabinets, in the attics. It's in remission. For one day it will emerge. And then, he says, for the education or to the misfortune of mankind, it will once again send its rats into a once happy city. You see? The rule of law is one instrument, not the only instrument, but one instrument to fight that plague germ. And there's another thing, and I'll leave you with this, because it meant a lot to me. And it might not mean as much to you, but it did to me. Again, my generation, and I'll read it to you. And I urge you, if you have the time, you can get this now on YouTube. And what I would like you to look at is I would like you to look at a talk that Bobby Kennedy gave on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. On that day, he was in Indianapolis, and gradually the news was coming out. And he was supposed to speak in a poor section of the city, which was heavily African American, that's who lived there. And the governor of Indiana said to him, don't go. Don't go. There will be riots all over the country. It's too dangerous. And Bobby Kennedy said no. He said, I'm going to go. And you can see him on that YouTube thing. As he gets up, and he talks to that group out there. And he tells them about Martin Luther King. And I just want 3 sentences. It's worth reading the whole thing. But 3 sentences. See, he was a classicist. I'll read you the 3. He's talking to them, and they're listening. They're listening. They've taken in the news. He says, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He wrote, in our sleep, pain, which cannot forget, falls drop by drop upon the heart until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another and a feeling of justice towards those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. And today he would have added whether they be Hispanic or whether they be Jews or Christians or Muslims. Yeah. And at the end he says, so let us dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Very serious, but it's worth having a serious thought. But remember, today is a happy day. It is a happy day for you. It is a happy day for me to be here. It is a happy day for all your friends and family who are here. And you have earned a happy day. So turn your minds to that, and thank you very much.
I did think the justice would want his Constitution back. That was extraordinary. Thank you so much.